Remarks delivered by President Mike Pence on the administration's policy towards China at the Hudson Institute on October 4th, 2018. Thank you, Ken, for that kind of introduction to the members of the Board of Trustees, to Dr. Michael Pillsbury, to our distinguished guests, and to all of you who, true to your mission, think about the future in unconventional ways. It's an honor to be back at the Hudson Institute. For more than half a century, this institute has dedicated itself to advanced global security, prosperity, and freedom. And while Hudson's hometowns have changed over the years, one thing has held constant. You have always advanced that vital truth that American leadership lights the way. And today, I bring greetings from a champion of American leadership at home and abroad, the 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump. From early in his administration, President Trump has made our relationship with China and the presidency a priority. On April 6th of last year, President Trump welcomed President Xi to Mar-a-Lago. On November 8th of last year, President Trump traveled to Beijing, where China leaders welcomed him warmly. Over the course of the past 2 years, our president has forged a strong personal relationship with the President of the People's Republic of China, and they worked closely on issues of common interest, most importantly the denuclearization of the North Korean peninsula. But I come before you today because of the American people deserve to know. As we speak, Beijing is employing a whole-of-the-government approach, using political, economic, and military tools as well as propaganda to advance its influence and benefit its interests in the United States. China is also applying this power in more proactive ways than ever before to exert influence and interference in the domestic policy and politics of our country. Under our administration, we will take decisive action to respond to China with American leadership, applying the principles and the policies long advocated in this House. In the national security strategy that President Trump released last December, he described a new era of great power competition. Foreign nations have begun to reassert their influence regionally and globally, and they are contesting Americans' geopolitical advantages and trying to change the international order in their favor. In this strategy, President Trump made it clear that the United States of America has adopted a new approach to China. We seek a relationship grounded in fairness, reciprocity, and respect for sovereignty, and we have taken strong and swift action to achieve that goal. As the President said last year on his visit to China, we have an opportunity to strengthen the relationship between our two countries and improve the lives of our citizens. Our vision of the future is built on the best parts of our past, when America and China reached out to one another in a spirit of openness and friendship. When our young nation went searching in the wake of the Revolutionary War for new markets for our exports, the Chinese people welcomed Americans, traders laden with ginger and fur. When China suffered through the indignities and exploitation during her so-called century of humiliation, America refused drawing in and advocated the open door policy so that we could have freer trade with China and preserve their sovereignty. When American missionaries brought the good news to China's shores, and they were moved by the rich culture of an ancient but vibrant people, And not only did they spread their faith, they also founded some of China's first and finest universities. When the Second World War arose, we stood together as allies in the fight against imperialism. And in that war aftermath, America ensured that China became a charter member of the United Nations and a great shaper of the post-war world. But soon after it took power in 1949, the Chinese Communist Party began to pursue authoritarian expansionism. Only 5 years after our nations had fought together, we fought each other on the mountains and in the valleys of the Korean Peninsula. My own father saw combat on those front lines of freedom. Not even the brutal Korean War could diminish our mutual desire to restore the ties that for so long bound us together. China's estrangement from the United States ended in 1972, and soon after we re-established diplomatic relations, began to open our economies to one another, and American universities began training a new generation of Chinese engineers, business leaders, scholars, and officials. After the fall of the Soviet Union, we assumed that a free China was inevitable, nearly with optimism at the turn of the 21st century. America agreed to give Beijing open access to our economy and bring China into the World Trade Organization. Previous administrations made this choice in the hope that freedom in China would expand in all forms, not just economically but politically, with a newfound respect for classical liberal principles, private property, religious freedom, and the entire family of human rights. But that hope has gone unfulfilled. The dream of the freedom remained distant for the Chinese people. And while Beijing still pays lip service to reform and opening, Deng Xiaoping's famous policy now rings hollow. Over the past 17 years, China's GDP has grown ninefold. It has become the second largest economy in the world. Much of this success was driven by American investment in China, and the Chinese Communist Party has also used an arsenal of policies inconsistent with free and fair trade, including tariffs, quotas, currency and manipulation, forced technology transfer, intellectual property theft, and industrial subsidies doled out like candy, to name a few. These policies have built Beijing's manufacturing base at the expense of its competitors, especially America. China's actions have contributed to a trade deficit with the United States that last year ran to $375 billion, nearly half of a global trade deficit. As President Trump said just this week, we rebuilt China over the last 25 years. Now, though the Made in China 2025 plan, the Communist Party has set its sights on controlling 90% of the world's most advanced industries, including robotics, biotechnology, and artificial intelligence. To win the commanding heights of the 21st century economy, Beijing has directed its bureaucrats and businesses to obtain American intellectual property and the foundation of our economic leadership by any means necessary. Beijing now acquires many American businesses to hand over their trade secrets at the cost of doing business in China. It also coordinates and sponsors the acquisition of American firms to gain ownership of their creations. Worst of all, Chinese security agencies have masterminded the wholesale theft of American technology, including cutting-edge military blueprints. And using that stolen technology, the Chinese Communist Party is turning plowshares into swords on a massive scale. China now spends as much on its military as the rest of Asia combined, and Beijing has prioritized capacities to erode America's military advantages on land, at sea, in the air, and in space. China wants nothing less than to push the United States of America from the Western Pacific and attempt to prevent us from coming to the aid of our allies. Beijing is also using its power like never before. Chinese ships routinely patrol around the Senkaku Islands, which are administered by Japan, and while China's leader stood in the Rose Garden of the White House in 2015 and said that his country had no intention to militarize the South China Sea, today Beijing has deployed advanced anti-ship and anti-air missiles atop an archipelago of military bases constructed on artificial islands. China's aggression was on display this week when a Chinese naval vessel came within 45 yards of the USS Decatur as it conducted freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea, forcing our ships to quickly maneuver to avoid collision. Despite such reckless harassment, the United States Navy will continue to fly, sail, and operate whenever international law allows and our national interests demand. We will not be intimidated. We will not stand down. America has hoped that economic liberalization would bring China into greater partnership with us and with the world. Instead, China has chosen economic aggression, which has in turn emboldened its growing military. Nor, as we hoped, has Beijing moved toward greater freedom for its people. For a time, Beijing inched forward toward a greater liberty and respect for human rights, but in recent years it has taken a sharp U-turn toward control and oppression. Today, China has built an unparalleled surveillance state and is growing more expansive and intrusive, open with the help of U.S. technology. The Great Firewall of China likewise grows higher, drastically restricting the free flow of information to the Chinese people. And by 2020, China's rulers aim to implement an Orwellian system premised on controlling virtually every facet of human life, and the so-called social credit score. In the words of the program's official blueprint, it will allow trustworthy to roam everywhere under heaven, while making it hard for the discredited to take a single step. And when it comes to religious freedom, a new wave of persecution is crashing down on Chinese Christians, Buddhists, and Muslims. Last month, Beijing shut down one of China's largest underground churches. Across the country, authorities are tearing down crosses, burning Bibles, and imprisoning believers. And Beijing has now reached a deal with the Vatican that gives their avowedly atheist Communist Party a direct role in appointing Catholic bishops. For China's Christians, these are desperate times. Beijing is also cracking down on Buddhism. Over the past decade, more than 150 Tibetan Buddhist monks have lit themselves on fire to protest China's repression of their beliefs and culture. And in Xinjiang, the Communist Party has imprisoned as many as 1 million Muslim Uyghurs in government camps, where they endured around-the-clock brainwashing. Survivors of the camps have described their experiences as a deliberate attempt by Beijing to strangle Uyghur culture and stamp out the Muslim faith. But as history attests, A country that oppresses its own people rarely stops there. Beijing also aims to expand its reach across the wider world. As Hudson's own Dr. Michael Pillsbury has said, China has opposed the actions and the goals of the United States government. Indeed, China is building its own relationships with America's allies and enemies that contradict any peaceful or productive intentions of Beijing. China used the so-called debt diplomacy to expand its influence. Today, that country is offering hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure loans to governments from Asia to Africa, to Europe, to even Latin America. Yet, the terms of those loans are opaque at best, and the benefits flow overwhelmingly to Beijing. Just ask Sri Lanka, which took a massive debt to let Chinese state companies build a port with questionable commercial value. 2 years ago, that country could not afford its payments, so Beijing pressured Sri Lanka to deliver its new port directly into Chinese hands. It may soon become a forward military base for China's growing blue water navy. With our own hemisphere, Beijing has extended a lifeline to the corrupt and incompetent Maduro regime in Venezuela, pledging $5 billion in questionable loans that can be repaid with oil. China is also that country's single largest creditor, saddling the Venezuelan people with more than $50 billion in debt. Beijing is also corrupting some nations' politics by providing direct support to parties and candidates who promise to accommodate China's strategic objectives. And since last year, the Chinese Communist Party has convinced 3 Latin American nations to sever its ties with the Taipei and recognize Beijing. These nations threaten the stability of Taiwan Strait, and the United States of America condemns these actions. And while our administration will continue to respect our One China policy as reflected in the 3 joint communiques and the Taiwan Relations Act, America will always believe Taiwan's embrace of democracy shows a better path for all the Chinese people. There are only a few of the ways that China has sought to advance its strategic interests across the world with growing intensity and sophistication. Yet, previous administrations all but ignored China's actions, and in many cases, they abetted them. But those days are over. Under President Trump's leadership, the United States of America has been defending our interests with renewed American strength. We will be making the strongest military in the history of the world. Stronger still, earlier this year, the President signed into law the largest increase in our national defense since the days of Ronald Reagan, $716 billion to extend our military dominance in every domain. We are modernizing our nuclear arsenal. We are developing new cutting-edge fighters and bombers. We are rebuilding a new generation of aircraft carriers and warships, and we are investing as never before in our armed forces. This includes initiating the process to establish the United States Space Force to ensure our continued dominance in space, and authorizing increased capacities in the cyber world to build deterrence against our adversaries. And as President Trump's direction, we are also implementing tariffs on $250 billion in Chinese goods. with the highest tariff specifically targeting the advanced industries that Beijing is trying to capture and control. And the president has also made it clear that he will level even more tariffs, with the possibility of substantially more than doubling that number, unless a fair and reciprocal deal is made. Our actions have had a major impact. China's largest stock exchange fell by 25% in the first 9 months of this year, in large part because our administration has stood up to Beijing's trade practices. As President Donald Trump has made clear, we do not want China's markets to suffer. In fact, we want them to thrive. But the United States wants Beijing to pursue trade policies that are free, fair, and reciprocal. Sadly, China's rulers have refused to take that path so far. The American people deserve to know that, in response to the strong stand that President Trump has taken, Beijing is pursuing a comprehensive and coordinated campaign to undermine support for the president, our agenda, and our nation's most cherished ideals. I want to tell you today what we know about China's actions, some of which we've gleaned from the intelligence assessments, some of which are publicly available, but all of which is a fact. As I said before, Beijing is employing a whole-of-the-government approach to advance its influence and benefits its citizens' interests. It's employing this power in more proactive and coercive ways to interfere in the domestic policies and the policies of the politics of the United States. The Chinese Communist Party is rewarding or coercing American businesses, movie studios, universities, think tanks, scholars, journalists, and local, state, and federal officials. Worst of all, China has initiated an unprecedented effort to influence American public opinion, the 2018 elections, and the environment leading into the 2020 presidential elections. To put it bluntly, President Trump's leadership is working, and China wants a different American president. China is meddling in America's democracy. As President Trump said just last week, we have found that China has been attempting to interfere in our upcoming 2018 midterm elections. Our intelligence community says that China is targeting U.S. state and local governments and officials to exploit any divisions between federal and local levels on policy. It's using a wedge issues like trade tariffs to advance Beijing's political influence. In June, Beijing circulated a sensitive document entitled Propaganda and Censorship Notice that laid out its strategy. It stated that China must strike accurately and carefully, splitting apart different domestic groups in the United States. To that end, Beijing has mobilized covert actors, front groups, and propaganda outlets to shift America's perception of Chinese policies. As a senior career member of our intelligence community recently told me, what the Russians are doing pales in comparison to what China is doing across this country. Senior Chinese officials have also tried to influence business leaders to condemn our trade actions, leveraging their desire to maintain their operations in China. In one recent example, they threatened to deny a business license for a major U.S. corporation if it refused to speak out against our administration's policies. And when it comes to influencing the midterms, you need only look at Beijing's tariffs in response to ours. They specifically targeted industries and states that would play an important role in the 2018 election. By one estimate, more than 80% of the U.S. counties targeted by China voted for President Trump in 2016. Now China wants to turn these voters against our administration. and China is also directly appealing to the American voters. Last week, the American government paid to have a multi-page the Chinese government paid to have a multi-page supplement inserted into the Des Moines Register, the paper of record in the home state of our ambassador to China, and the pivotal state in the 2018. The supplement designed to look like news articles cast our trade policies as reckless and harmful to Allies. Fortunately, Americans aren't buying it. For example, American farmers are standing with this president and are seeing real results from the strong stance that he has taken, including this week's U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, where we will substantially open North American markets to U.S. products, a great win for American farmers and manufacturers. But China's actions aren't focused solely on influencing our policies and politics. Beijing is also taking steps to explore its economic leverage and allure of China's large domestic market to advance its influence over American corporations. Beijing now acquires American joint ventures that operate in China, establishes party organizations within their company, giving the Communist Party a voice and perhaps a veto in hiring and investment decisions. Chinese authorities have also threatened U.S. companies that depict Taiwan as a distinct geographical entity or that stray from Chinese policy on Tibet. Beijing's compelled Delta Airlines to publicly apologize for not calling Taiwan a province of China on its website. It also pressured Merit to fire a U.S. employee who liked a tweet about Tibet. Beijing routinely demands that Hollywood portray China in a strictly positive light, and it punishes studios and producers that don't. Beijing's censors are quick to edit or outlaw movies that criticize China, even in minor ways. World War Z had to cut the strip's mentions of a virus originating in China. Red Dawn was digitally edited to make the villains North Korean, not Chinese. Beyond business, the Chinese Communist Party is spending billions of dollars on propaganda outlets in the United States as well as other countries. China Radio International now broadcasts Beijing-friendly programming on over 30 U.S. outlets, many in major American cities. The China Global Television Network reached more than 75 million Americans, and it gets its marching orders directly from its Communist Party masters, as China's top leader put it during a visit to the network's headquarters. The media run by the party and the government are propaganda fronts and must have the party as their surname. That is why last month the Department of Justice ordered that network to register as a foreign agent. The Communist Party has also threatened and detained the Chinese family members of American journalists who pry too deep, and it has blocked the websites of U.S. media organizations and made it harder for our journalists to get visas. This happened after the New York Times published investigative reports about the wealth of some of China's leaders. But the media isn't the only place where the Chinese Communist Party seeks to foster a culture of censorship. The same is true of academia. Look no further than the Chinese Student and Scholars Associations, of which there are more than 150 branches across American campuses. These groups help organize social events for some of the more than 430,000 Chinese nationals studying in the United States, and they also alert Chinese consulates, and embassies where Chinese students and American schools stray from the Communist Party line. At the University of Maryland, a Chinese student recently spoke at her graduation ceremony of what she called the fresh air of free speech in America. The Communist Party's official newspaper swiftly chastised her. She became the victim of a firestorm of criticism on China's tightly controlled social media, and her family back home was harassed. As for the university itself, its exchange program with China, one of the nation's most extensive, suddenly turned from a flood to a trickle. China exerts academic pressure in other ways too. Beijing provides generous funding to universities, think tanks, and scholars with the understanding that they will avoid ideas that the Communist Party finds dangerous or offensive. China experts in particular know that their visas will be delayed or denied if their research contradicts Beijing's talking points. And even scholars and groups who avoid Chinese funding are targeted by that country, as the Hudson Institute found out firsthand. After you offered to host a speaker Beijing didn't like, your website suffered a major cyber attack originating from Shanghai. You know better than most that the Chinese Communist Party is trying to undermine academic freedom and the freedom of speech in America today. These and other actions taken as a whole result in an intensifying effort to shift American public opinion and public policy away from the American first leadership of President Donald Trump. But our message to China's rulers is this: this president will not back down, and the American people will not be swayed. They will continue to stand strong for our security and our economy, even as we hope for improved relations with Beijing. Our administration will continue to act decisively to protect American interests, American jobs, and American security. As we rebuild our military, we will continue to assert American interests across the Indo-Pacific. As we respond to China's trade practices, we will continue to demand an economic relationship with China that is free and fair and reciprocal, demanding that Beijing break down its trade barriers, fulfill its trade obligations, and fully open its economy, just as we have opened ours. We will continue to take actions until Beijing ends the theft of American intellectual property and stop the predatory practice of forced technology transfer, and to advance our vision of free and open Indo-Pacific. We are building new and stronger bonds with the nations that share our values across the region, from India to Samoa. Our relationships will flow from a spirit of respect built on partnership, not domination. We are forging new trade deals on a bilateral basis. Just as last week, President Trump signed an improved trade deal with South Korea, and will soon begin negotiating a historical bilateral free trade deal with Japan. And we are streamlining international development and finance programs, giving foreign nations a just and transparent alternative to China's debt trap diplomacy. To that end, President Trump will sign the BUILD Act into law in the days ahead. And next month will be my privilege to represent the United States in Singapore and Papua New Guinea at ASEAN and APEC. There we will unveil new measures and programs in support of free and open Indo-Pacific. And on behalf of the President, I will deliver the message that America's commitment to the Indo-Pacific has never been stronger. To protect our interests here at home, we've strengthened CFIUS, the Community on Foreign Investment in the United States, highlighting our security of Chinese investment in America to protect our national security from Beijing's predatory actions. And when it comes to Beijing's malign influence and interference in American politics and policy, we will continue to expose it no matter the form it takes. And we will work with leaders at every level of society to defend our national interests and the most cherished ideas. The American people will play the decisive role, and in fact, they already are. As we gather here, a new consensus is rising across America. More business leaders are thinking beyond the next quarter and thinking twice before diving into the Chinese market, if it means turning over their intellectual property or abetting Beijing's oppression. But more must follow suit. For example, Google should immediately end the development of the Dragonfly app that will strengthen Communist Party censorship and compromise the privacy of Chinese customers. More journalists are reporting the truth without fear or favor and digging deeper to find where China is interfering in our society and why we hope that more American, the global news organizations will join in this effort. More scholars are speaking out forcefully and defending academic freedom, and more universities and think tanks are mastering the courage to turn away Beijing's easy money, recognizing that every dollar comes with a corresponding demand. We are confident that more will join their ranks. And across the nation, the American people are growing in vigilance with a newfound appreciation for our administration's action to reset America's economic and strategic relationship with China and to finally put America first. And under President Trump's leadership, America will stay the course. China should know that the American people and their elected representatives in both parties are resolved. As our national security strategy states, competition does not always mean hostility. As President Trump has made it clear, we want a constructive leadership with Beijing, where our prosperity and security grow together, not apart. While Beijing has been moving further away from this vision, China's rulers can still change course and return to the spirit of reform and opening and greater freedom. The American people want nothing more. The Chinese people deserve nothing less. The great Chinese storyteller Lu Xun often lamented that his country has either looked down as foreigners or brutes, or up to them as saints, but never as equals. Today, America is reaching out our hand to China. We hope that Beijing will soon reach back and heed not words and with renewed respect for America, but we will not relent until our relationship with China is grounded in fairness, reciprocity, and respect for sovereignty. There is an ancient Chinese proverb that tells us that man sees only the present, but heaven sees the future. And as we go forward, let us pursue a future of peace and prosperity with resolve and faith. Faith in the President Trump's leadership and the relationship that has forged with China's president. Faith in the enduring friendship between the American people and the Chinese people. Faith that heaven sees the future, and by God's grace, America and China will meet the future together. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America. The end.